Gentlemen, what is going on today? My name is Ryan Mickler. I'm the host and the founder of the Order of Man podcast and movement. Welcome here and welcome back. Really excited to be talking with you today because we're going to be covering issues that I've been thinking about for probably longer, probably more like a decade, and why this is so important in the concept and the conversations of masculinity and manliness. Before I do, want to make a couple of announcements. We've got a couple of really cool events coming up, guys. The first one is on May 7th. This is an event that we're going to do in Northern California. It's a one-day event. You're going to be able to come and hang out and spend some time with me and Bedros Keuilian and Jack Donovan, Tanner Guzzi, John Lovell, Stephen Mansfield, Matt Boudreau. The lineup of men that we have at this event is phenomenal. And we handpicked these guys to be at this event to be able to speak on the subjects of masculinity, to be able to have conversations with you, to be able to do breakouts, to be able to eat and break bread together. This is going to be very, very powerful, and we're very limited on seating. Again, it's May 7th. It's called Man Uncaged. So if you go to manuncaged.com/live, manuncaged.com/live, then you're going to be able to have access to and pick up your ticket and reservation for the very first inaugural Man Uncaged event. Again, that's May 7th, manuncaged.com/live. The next event that we have coming up is on May 28th. This is going to be on my property here in Maine, and it's a father-son event. It's designed as a rite of passage. So my oldest son and I went to this event in California last year, and it was so incredible that I decided to partner up with Bedros Keuilian and the rest of his team, including Ray Kashkar, to bring this event to the East Coast where it belongs, on my property here in Maine. So you're going to see the barn, and we're going to put you and your son through some rigorous physical, mental, and emotional events, activities, and challenges, all designed to give you what you need to help you usher your son into manhood. And it doesn't have to be just your son. It could be a nephew, obviously a stepson, which I would still consider a son. Maybe it's a young man in your community that you have permission and you're mentoring. So if you're interested in that, very, very few seats left. I think there's probably 5 seats left. That's May 28th of this year. And if you go to squireprogram.com/Ryan, squireprogram.com/Ryan, you can check that out. Now, one thing you'll notice from me, guys, is you're not going to hear a bunch of ads. I know I talk about Origin a lot because they're good friends of mine and I believe in what they're doing. But you're not going to hear a bunch of ads for me hawking who knows what, underwear and mattresses and all kinds of weird stuff that some of these other podcasts do. The way that we promote and sponsor and fund what we're doing here is through our events, is through book sales, things like merchandise sales. It's all in-house. So if you want to support what we're doing and keep it ad-free, which is what I want, I don't want that, then please support us by coming to these events. They're good for you, they're good for us, and they advance the mission. All right. Now, with that said, let's talk about the real subject of today, which is the 4 great lies of masculinity. The first thing I want to do before we get into this is tell you that I don't want to get tripped up in semantics in this, okay? So you're going to hear me say some things that maybe you agree with, maybe you don't agree with, but the words that are being used aren't as important as the concepts that we're talking about. So if you want to use a different word or something interchangeably, by all means, right? We got to look at these things in the context of the greater conversation. It's the concept. And I'm trying to put these words to the concepts so that we all are on the same page about what is masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? What is manliness? So let's break this down. These are the 4 great lies. The sooner we can have the truth and speak from reality about what masculinity and manliness is, the more, or the quicker, I should say, that we can work towards becoming more proficient men. Number 1, this is the one you hear all the time. Masculinity is toxic. Guys, it's not toxic. Okay. And what people who use this term quite frequently will say is they'll say, well, Ryan, we're not saying all men are toxic. You might not be saying that, but there are people who are saying that. And when you paint masculinity with a broad stroke that says it's toxic, or even allude to the fact that it's toxic, then you start to plant that into people's minds. And that's actually the intent more often than not. Not always, but more often than not, I believe the intent of saying that masculinity is toxic is so that masculinity can be undermined, deconstructed, redefined, and rooted away from society. Okay, I'm not interested in that. I don't think you are. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast. But masculinity is not inherently toxic. Now, the American Psychological Association did a study. This was, gosh, I can't remember right offhand. It must have been several years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago. And I'm using study very loosely. And they said in the study that the attributes that we would typically associate with masculinity, and the 4 they listed were competitiveness, dominance, stoicism, and aggression, are naturally and inherently dangerous and destructive to young men. Well, that just isn't true. That's unequivocally false. Now, can those attributes be dangerous? Yes, they can, but they're not inherently dangerous. Let's take violence as an example. If I'm walking down the street and I decide to pull out a knife or a gun and stab or shoot somebody with that knife or gun and steal their possessions, I think we'd all agree that that would be a violent act. And I think we could all agree that that would not be in the best interest of other people. So that is a dangerous situation. And that's a poor use, to put it mildly, of being aggressive or being violent. Now, let's counter that. If I'm laying in bed at 2 a.m. at night and I hear somebody break into my house and my alarm goes off, or I hear the glass shatter, or I hear the door open, and I grab the firearm that's by my bedside, excuse me, and I find who that intruder is, and I plant a bullet between his eyes and neutralize that threat, I think the overwhelming majority of us would say that that was a righteous use of violence. I have the moral right, and not only the right, but the responsibility to protect myself and protect other people by any means necessary. So is violence bad? Depending on the context, it can be. But in other contexts, it could be righteous, and it could be virtuous, and it could actually be moral. So we know that masculinity in and of itself is not inherently toxic. Now, the next great lie is in line with what I just shared, because what I found is there's 2 camps of people when it comes to this conversation. There's the camp generally that says, well, masculinity is toxic and it's destructive and we need to root it out and we need to civilize men, yada, yada, yada. And then the other side of the camp says, well, no, masculinity is good. It's virtuous. It's right. It's moral. It's all these things. Well, it isn't that either. Okay. And that's the second great lie, is that masculinity is virtuous. Guys, it is not virtuous. Because again, if I'm using the hormones and the characteristics and the behaviors that are coursing through my veins to do harm to other people, we could say that that's a product of masculinity, but it isn't a righteous act, right? Masculinity is amoral. It's neither good nor bad, right versus wrong, evil versus righteous. The way that we utilize and the way that we harness the masculine characteristics and virtues coursing through our veins is what determines if we're being evil or we're being righteous. And this is something that I think a lot of people who have listened to the podcast for any amount of time or are connected with us in some way might actually disagree with me on. But I've got another book coming out the end of this fall, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've actually had to challenge my own perceptions of masculinity and manliness and what it means to be a man. And the conclusion that I came to is that masculinity is neither moral or evil. It's amoral. It just is. Because how do we define masculinity? That's the most important thing we need to do in this conversation. Define masculinity. And I'm going to throw out a definition that I think is broadly applicable, and it might vary a little bit here and there, but I think we can all agree that masculinity is a set of characteristics and behaviors that is determined by our biological makeup. So it's our testosterone, it's our other hormones, it's the way our minds work, it's how we were introduced to these hormones, even in utero, that really determine if we're going to be masculine or feminine, or where on that spectrum, I guess you could say, that we might fall. Okay, so it's very important we get the definitions right. And this is why I don't want to get tripped up in semantics, but it is important to realize that masculinity is simply characteristics and behaviors that we see and are a result, a proven result, by the way, of the hormones and the chemicals and the biological makeup that we have as men. How we use it is what defines us as men, which leads me into point number 3. And that is the lie that masculinity is earned. Well, no, it's not actually earned. If masculinity is amoral and masculinity is simply what we are as defined by our biological makeup, then masculinity isn't earned. It's a birthright, nothing more, nothing less. You were born a man or you were born a woman, period. Now, I know there's intersex people and that's, and obviously I'm not talking about trans issues at this point. I'm talking about biological truth here, man, woman. And yes, there is a very, very small percentage, 0.01%, maybe even less, of individuals who are actually intersex people. But that doesn't make up a third class of people. It doesn't make up a third sex. It means they fall out of the binary that we operate in. Okay. So if it's not earned, then what about manliness or masculinity is? Well, if masculinity is a birthright, then manliness is what needs to be earned. You need to earn being a man. Now, some people will say, no, a man just means you have a dick and balls. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Let's take my sons, for example, or my sons who are 14, 10, and 6. Are they men? Well, no. I mean, they have the biological makeup, so shouldn't they be men? Well, no, they're not. They're boys. They're adolescent males, but they're not men. Men makes them something more. Okay. You're not born a man. You're born a male, sure, but not a man. So what is a man? Well, a man is somebody who can take the masculine virtues and characteristics that's coursing through their veins, and they can harness them and they can wield them and they can use them for productive outcomes for themselves and for other people. That's where the whole motto on my hat here comes from. Protect, provide, preside. That's what makes you a man. So there's stories and situations of young men who have lost fathers, who have gone into the workforce to provide for their families. That's manly behavior. And alternatively, there's other individuals who are male, but they're 30, 35, 40, even older, still living at home, still mooching off the system, don't have a job, aren't contributing financially to the equation. And that's not manly behavior. No one would say that's being a man. We'd say that's a male. We'd say that's a little boy trapped in a man's body, but we certainly wouldn't say that's manly behavior. So guys, masculinity is not earned. Manliness is. Masculinity is a birthright, and manliness is something far greater. And we've been talking about that for 7 years. So if you have questions about what that is, if you're just joining us, you can go back and listen to any podcast that we've had because we talk about this in depth. All right. And then the last point that I want to make here, so this is lie number 4, is that masculinity is not as needed in society as it once was. This is one that I hear quite often, that masculinity is not needed in society as it once was. And while I can agree that the likelihood of you having to fend off a violent attacker or protect yourself or a loved one from a dangerous encounter is not as prevalent as it once was, I disagree with the premise that it's as not needed as it once was. Now, the way we might go about doing it is going to change. The way we administer manliness is going to change over time. It's going to evolve 100%. So if you take, let's take a farmer 200 years ago, wanted to put food on his family's table, wanted to make sure they have a roof over their head, wanted to make sure that he had a safe place that they could grow and thrive and live. Well, what did he have to do? Well, he had to fend off intruders. He had to fend off warring tribes. He also had to go out and till the ground. He had to raise the cows. He had to go hunting. He had to go fishing. Right? These are all the things that he needed to do, the repairs on the house. These are all the things that he needed to do 200 plus years ago. And now you don't have to do any of that. Right? Like, when's the last time, for the overwhelming majority of you, I know there are some of you, and I commend you, when's the last time you actually raised an animal and then killed it, slaughtered it, and consumed it? When's the last time that you actually went hunting? When's the last time you did a major repair on your house? No, you probably called somebody to do it. And this is the benefit of modern times. I don't have to do it all, right? I can be on this podcast and I can offer other programs and courses and events like we have coming up and books, and I can make money, and then I can take that money and I can spend it on food at the grocery store. I don't have to go hunting. I do, but I don't have to. If there's a big project around the house, I don't have to do it myself. I can hire somebody to do it. I don't have to worry about fending off an intruder, right? Or deal with an emergency situation, because in the majority of those situations, not all, somebody could simply call the police or the fire department. So we've outsourced a lot of this, but that's not to say that we aren't without risk. And it's not to say that we still don't have to put food on the table, a roof over our family's head, make sure they're protected, make sure they're safe. And how many of you have actually dealt with a violent encounter? Quite a few of you probably have had to either draw your gun, fire your gun, fight somebody, defend somebody else, pull somebody out of a car, pull somebody out of a building. These are all reasons why masculinity is so important. And not only that, you had to build things and you had to do the rougher jobs like construction and building skyscrapers and picking up the trash and working on the plumbing and working on the heat. Like, these are the harder jobs that generally women aren't doing. It's not to dismiss what they do. It's not to dismiss what women bring to the equation, because what they do is crucial. And maybe I'll do another episode when we talk about the 4 great lies of femininity. And I can tell you the first one is that you don't have to act like a man in order to be a woman. That's the first one I would say. But guys, it's very, very crucial that we understand that masculinity, even though it's not inherently toxic, it's not inherently virtuous, and it's not really earned, doesn't mean that we don't need it. We actually do need it. And the way that we harness it, the conversations that we have, the way we teach our sons, the way we honor and celebrate masculinity, the way that we reward and encourage an effective use of masculinity, the more that we can do that and show, hey, when your sons are angry, it's okay to be angry. Let me show you how to use that anger to produce productive outcomes. I know when I was a little boy, I had a lot of anger issues, and I didn't really have a permanent father figure in my life to start working me through how I deal with those anger issues. So I was left to fend on my own. Now, my mom did a great job to the degree that she could, but she's a woman. She'll never understand what it is to be a man. Never. And so we need other men in society who are taking these young boys and instructing them and coaching them and counseling them and guiding them and ushering them into manliness by harnessing their masculinity. I wanted to talk about this today because I think it's so important that we get the verbiage and we get the language right. And I've been talking about this for a long time, so it's very clear in my head. And it's become more clear as I wrote that book that's coming out in the fall. But these are the types of conversations that we all need to get on the same page with us. And I'm not saying I'm 100% accurate or right. In fact, I'd love to hear from you. If you have a differing opinion, please let me know what it is. But these are the kind of conversations that we need to have. Truthful conversations, bold, tough conversations. We need to be able to share our opinions in a meaningful way where we can start to figure out what is going on. Like, what is going on with our men? Suicide, depression, drug use, alcohol abuse, pornography use. Then our younger men are falling behind in academia, falling behind in work, falling behind in income, their crime rates, imprisonment. And this is only going to get worse as we see a growing wave of young boys who are being raised without masculine, manly, they're different, right? I explained, masculine, manly men in the home, permanent fixtures of the home and permanent fixtures of society. This is what I want. This is what I think you want. This is who you want to be. This is who you want your sons to be. So let's get the verbiage right. Let's come at it from the right framework, the right understanding, the right foundation, so we can have more meaningful conversations about how in the world do we actually do this. And I'm going to follow up next week with how exactly we do this. But the first thing is let's lay the groundwork, lay the foundation. Masculinity is not inherently toxic. Masculinity is not inherently virtuous. Masculinity is not earned. Manliness is. And masculinity is needed just as much now as it ever was. If you have other ideas, other thoughts, you think I'm on, you think I'm off, whatever, share with me on the gram, share with me on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you are. Make sure to check out the couple of events because they're right in line with what we're talking about. The Man Uncaged event, May 7th. So that's manuncaged.com/live. And then on May 28th, we have the Squire program, which is for fathers or father figures and their sons or son figures. I think you guys understand. That's May 28th. And you can go to squireprogram.com/Ryan. That one's in Maine, May 28th. All right, guys, we'll be back for our interview next week. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.